Hello everyone, this is Faye from Twilight Crafts, and I thought I would just do a short process video just to talk through some of the techniques I use to make backgrounds for mixed media scrapbook pages. So I've got a few layouts just to show you, and then we'll get on to having a go at a couple of techniques. So I generally combine mixed media with Jenny Wren Cutfiles, and this one here is the scallop cut file, and it comes in a whole page, and you cut in coloured paper and then you layer it up. But then I go back in with some distress oxides and a stencil here over the top on that one. This one here is a technique that I'm going to show in this video. We had a request just to show how the background was made, and I have to say I get inspired by lots of people on Facebook and YouTube. I watch people's process videos to get inspiration. I'm a particularly big fan of MK Gunn, who I know is a member of this group, and I've learned lots about ways to use things around the house to make backgrounds. So that's one I particularly enjoyed. I've got a couple more here. So again, using the colour wheel Jenny Wren cut file, and here more distress inks and some distress oxides on that one. This one, I particularly like this technique for making water backgrounds. That's actually cling film. So I will show how you can create a background like that to make a kind of sea or water effect. Then I certainly love lots of drips and splats, and I get those in anywhere I can. And of course, getting a bit of rainbow. I love a rainbow. So this one was for a challenge on another group. Inspired by that, lots of blobs, splats, and then tipping the page to allow the ink to run. And that was actually just watercolors, some watercolors from a palette that I had, and lots of water to allow that one to drip. And then this one here, actually using a water brush, just like this, some background stamps that I had, and a water brush with dipped in some inks to make really rough circles, and then actually a black biro for some scribbles, just to make some scribbles, some little cut out pieces of paper and some scribbles on there. And then I also like to make kind of full backgrounds. So this rainbow background was just a piece of white cardstock, and building up the layers. I love watching Vicky Boutin make her mixed media background, so lots of inspiration there to check out. And again, building up the layers with drips and splats. This one, packaging technique inspired by MK Gunn, cutting out bits of cereal packets to make squares or circles or rectangles, building it up and then adding layers with inks and paints. That one. And then my last one, I do love a rainbow, and this is a Bramble Fox sunburst stencil, and that is with distress inks and oxides. So let's have a little go. In terms of the cardstock I use, I always go for a 300 GSM smooth cardstock, which we sell in the shop. It's a really heavy weight and it holds the medium well. I do have a very messy mat that's upside down, and my trusty Tim Holtz mixed media mat, because then I can make a complete mess and it should clear up quite easily. Other things that are my go-to, big pots of white acrylic paint, because I just love adding white, and then I like this high density modelling paste. I also love this. This is a little bit hard to get hold of, but this is a glass bead gel, and it's got lots of tiny little glass beads in, so it gives a really nice texture if you're creating a kind of water or rough effect. I always go to my Dina Wakley gloss sprays, so I thought I'd try some of those today in Ocean and Night. I always go to my Vicky Boutin art crayons. Again, these are really hard to come by now. They've stopped manufacturing those. And then a range of distress inks and oxides, because I'm going to have a go at building up that kind of sea water effect. And then I always have gesso. This one is much thicker, the Deco Art thicker gesso, and then a good old giant tub. I think this is from the Works of white acrylic gesso. And then for the technique to build up the sea background, I'm going to do a quick demo of how I would build up that sea background. So I'll move that out of the way, and I do tend to use things that you find around the house. So I quite like to use napkins, or some deli paper works quite nicely. And then in terms of the other sea technique that I showed you, using the cling film, this kind of technique, I go into the kitchen and I find either a food bag, which is a slightly thicker plastic consistency, or a piece of cling film. So I'll show you how I build that up. Tin foil also makes quite a nice technique for inking and pressing onto the background. So any found materials in the kitchen, it is mine. I grab it and I use it. So for the sea technique, I kind of separate the napkin. I use this in a piece. Most napkins come in 2 layers, and I keep that coloured layer to use for something else. But I then use this thinner piece and get the nice thick heavyweight cardstock, and then I just start by adding a layer of gesso to the area I want to add the tissue to. So it's quite messy, this bit, which is why I've got my really messy mat, and I just put 1 layer on, quite a thick layer, and it doesn't have to be neat. We want it to kind of look quite messy. And then taking the tissue, I kind of tear into strips, and you can have it in as big or small strips. Scrunch up, because I don't want it to look neat. I want it to look quite scrunched. And then I just start to lay it onto the paper, or the cardstock, should I say. But then, because I want it to kind of stick to the paper, I kind of scrunch it where I want to and go back and just start to dab, because you need it to be fairly soggy. So there is a bit of drying time in between this stage and the next, because the next stage is where you're going to start adding the colour, and you'll want it to be completely dry when you start to add the colour. So I get the next piece, give it a tear and scrunch it up, and then come back and you can decide how rough you want your sea to look. Is it a calm day or is it a stormy day? And as you just dab the gesso, it kind of sticks to the page, and then obviously as that dries off, that sort of hardens and holds it all in place because it is acrylic based. Okay, and then one more strip maybe to add to this. I could do maybe 1 or 2 more strips to add. And then you're going to go back in with the colour once it's dry. And when I applied the colour, I just dabbed it on with a piece of acetate because I didn't want to get too much colour all in one place. So last piece, I think, to go on the top. Scrunch it up. I might make this a little bit wavy along the top. Right, nearly done. So that is very gloopy. Make sure the gesso is underneath and on top because you want it to stick to the page. I kind of smooth it in places where it might be a bit too rough, because I've got to remember I want to build a scrapbook layout on the top, so I don't want it to be too rough. So there is, let me hold that up so people can see. I've got very messy hands. So there is the background, the start of our seascape. So I'm going to set that one aside, and that might need a little bit of drying time before I come back and add the ink. So I'm going to move that one aside to dry. So then with the next technique, slightly softer technique, I would say, on this one. So you can decide to use your gloss sprays or some watered down distress inks and oxides. Let the camera focus a moment. And then you take a piece of cling film. Now, does anybody find this is really difficult to unravel? You don't want to get it unevenly unraveling. So take a piece that's maybe the width of the paper. So I've got a piece here, and then I'm going to move that across so that I've got my mixed media mat here, because I want to be able to ink this up, and then you're going to scrunch it up. Once it's inked, you're going to flip it over and you're going to just dab it where you want it in the place and then lift it off. The messier the better in my view. We want it to be messy. So I get a water sprayer, and let's start with Mermaid Lagoon. So I'm going to ink and water that down, and you can decide how much you add. It's entirely up to you. So you could decide to just drip it straight into there to pick it up and then lift, and you've got the ink on. You could go back in and add a little bit more so that we've got a nice spread, and then you can see you've got the pattern there ready to just dab and lift, and it allows you to just build it up where you want it. Now, if you've got an idea of a photo and some embellishments you want to use, you can shape this to the size of your layout. So it just, when you use the acetate, so I often go in just with an acetate sheet and just dab. I don't know if I've got a piece of acetate here, but you can use a piece of acetate. Yeah, so I've just got, this is a very well used piece. You can go in and just lift the acetate like this, and you can dab, but the acetate gives a more blanket layer. What I like about the cling film technique is it takes on the creases and allows you to place it kind of more sporadically, a bit more spaced out. Right, so let's clean up that mermaid lagoon there a little bit, wipe it from the cling film, and as you wipe it, you're going to get another type of crease, and I'm going to have some peacock feathers next. So I'm going to add some water to that, and I don't mind that there's a little bit of mermaid lagoon on this brush, that's okay. Mix that in a bit, pick some of that up, and let's have a go. See how that comes out with another layer of colour. And you can make it quite narrow, so you can really scrunch it. This side where you place it. And any tiny little bits that are left on there still lifts out. And then you can add gloss sprays to the cling film. And again, you could decide to add some gloss, because when that dries, that will give a slightly different shine. So I might add a little bit of gloss. Oh, that's bleeding quite nicely in there. But I might also give a few flicks of the gloss spray. And you see it's bleeding into the water there. I quite like that effect. So this will be ready to scrap my summer holiday photos. And then maybe to add a bit of depth, a couple of drips of the night gloss spray, just to almost add a, oh yeah. And that is bleeding in really nicely, starting to drip. I quite like the darker tone, is giving it some depth. Can you see how it bleeds into the, how it reacts to the oxides? So I'm going to lift that up so that you can see how that has bled in. So I really like how that has come out. So I'm going to set that aside to dry. Leave that one to the side. So then another technique that I quite like to use is some bubble wrap. Bubble wrap gives a really nice effect on a scrapbook layout, but also cling film, and that can be used in a similar way to the cling film technique, but get a bit of tin foil, get that scrunched up in a pattern that you like, and I might as well use some of this peacock feathers I've got here. Let's give that a go while I've got that colour there, and it will give similar effects to just lift off and press down. It's almost like creating your own custom stamp. So this one is probably even more spaced out than the cling film. Slightly different, and then maybe a little bit of the glass bead gel. I do love this stuff. So if you haven't used glass bead gel before, I just love it, because as it dries, it's picking up the colour, but as it dries, it will also give you a lovely shine to look like waves. So I've done this while it's still quite wet, because then the colour is going to blend in to the waves, to the ink. So if you haven't used glass bead gel before, see if you can get hold of some. I'd love it. So let's see if that can catch the light. Can you see that? Now I'm going to build that up. That's not enough layers for me. That's the base layer for me. I'd want to let that dry, and once the glass bead gel is set, I would go back in and be adding some other colours to give it more tone and depth. But that's just showing an idea of how you can use the glass bead gel. So I hope that's given you some ideas. I will finish off the tissue technique once it's dry, but hopefully that's given you a little bit of some ideas and some inspiration. So thanks for joining me, everyone, and we'd love you to subscribe to our YouTube channel here, and also hop on over and join our Facebook group, Twilight Crop and Craft. Okay, thanks for joining me, everyone.